Hi everyone, Simon from Horoma Studio. Today we're going to have a look at a little teardown of a project I did like a year ago or 2 years ago. It was a school, and even though it's called a teardown, today I want to focus more on like the sort of like process and kind of client relationship and exchanges we had. I might take a little bit of time as well to do some suggestion of how I would do things differently, but overall it will be focused more on like the process. So let's get started. So let's get started with a quick look at the project itself. So this is the 3D I got from the client. So as I said, it's a school with part that is like preschool and the other part is like elementary school or something like that. So we have like two different courtyards basically, and the main entrance is through here with like this sort of interesting like hallway kind of. And you have like this interesting underside here with like covered area with interesting patio kind of like openings in the slabs. Also, one of the main thing is that you have a lower part that is in like metal and concrete, and the upper part that is mainly in wood, or at least this part here. This part is slightly different. So nothing really, I mean, not just nothing special, but like very straightforward 3D with like quite a bit of detailing to add. There was nothing of the context, but basically you have like a secondary road. The main road is going here. There's a lot of planting and like vegetation around, so it was pretty simple to think of it. And the backdrop, you have a sort of like suburb, like high rises, not high rise, but like 6 to 7 story high buildings that are in the back. So you kind of are gonna see it from there. And in terms of point of views, it was two exterior point of views, one from the outside that is supposed to show like the sort of entrance sequence, and the other one that is supposed to show the courtyards, plural, so this one and this one. So we had to find something that works. And one thing that is interesting and that I wanted to mention is that, and that sort of goes with this idea of how like one of your main service first is to sort of provide the best idea in terms of point of view for your client, because when they came to me, they had they always like propose point of views that they think are going to be okay. And the weird thing with the one they proposed was that the first one was going to be something from the outside like this, which is quite similar to what we were going to have at the end. But the second one was basically from here and looking at this new project basically, or like this part of the project. What is interesting and what is kind of odd is that first it's basically kind of a zoomed in version of this one. So in terms of information, you're not going to see much more than this one here. So there was kind of a contradiction with what they were asking and how like the point of view they were proposing. One of the other things is that when you're here, you actually don't see the second entrance and the second courtyard, which is quite important. So that's the thing also that I find kind of misleading from the aspect. And also one thing that I'll show you in the next, like the proper point of views, is that there was all this system of patio or whatever that's called, like holes in the slabs, that was very interesting to have here. And even like with proper lighting, it would have been quite hard to read. And this is quite a big thing, I think, that was interesting in terms of architecture. And also one thing is that we were looking the other way from what you would actually want for this courtyard to be visible and to understand the sort of difference between the two. So let's have a look at the proposals I did first. So this one is the entrance is here. This is the secondary courtyard, and this one is here. Frontal view, I quite like frontal views, but the thing is, I kind of discovered, let's say with experience, you start to understand that frontal views are very, like calm and like simple and let's say quite straightforward and not that much dynamic, at least for like frontal views where everything is kind of orthogonal. And the thing is, when you're designing a school and the idea is to show the sort of like connection that you have in between the two courtyards and you want something to look a little bit dynamic, then you start to kind of explore more stuff that are less frontal, because it actually gives a little bit better like this idea of dynamism and like architecture being a little bit less boring than it is, even though this is not a boring project at all, but I mean like being a little bit more dynamic than it actually is. So this is something that sort of made me go away from frontal views, even though I must have others. Like this one was kind of okay because we're really frontal with the new entrance that we're trying to create. And it is interesting. The thing is that we were not really reading the whole architecture on the side. And when you do frontal views of such a long building, you don't want to have like a huge or like a super short focal length, because then you have so much distortion that it's starting to be very unappealing. Here is like a more kind of like what they asked for basically. And I think this is kind of the one we went for. Except that we wanted to read a little bit better the entrance here, but we have like a better connection with this one. We don't really read the left courtyard, which means that we will gonna have to show it in the secondary render. And we have like a quite good understanding of like the upper part being in wood and the lower part being in like concrete, basically. Here's like an internal view where I was basically, even though I was supposed to be here looking toward us as they were proposing, I really wanted to explore something that was more playing with this like slab system and show basically the sort of juxtaposition or of planes of like the covered part, the first courtyard, the sort of like walking part, and then the second courtyard, and then the sort of vegetation in the back. Because I thought it would be more interesting than the other point of view, which was more like this one, which would be very straightforward because you just have like the entrance, you have the sort of courtyard, first courtyard, and then you have the facade already, and you can't really understand what is going on under. So even though this is what they wanted to go for, it was very easy to convince them that something else was possible. And that's the thing I wanted to get to, is that you really have to listen to your client and understand what they are trying to show and make sure that the image they're asking for, or like the image they're going to propose, is showing exactly what they're asking for. And you also have to sort of prioritize all the things they want to show, because sometimes you can't show everything, of course. So that's the idea. If we keep on going, this one was like frontal from a little bit closer, but still had this problem that we were not seeing the back courtyard. And it was something that I think was very important because it was in the brief. And since we wouldn't be able to see it from the outside point of view, I really thought it would be necessary to have it here. This is the point of view we went for, or like kind of. I think it was very interesting. It's a little bit like quite angular and dynamic, but what is interesting is that this is very the funny thing is that the focal length is actually not that crazy, which means this is actually what you would experience as a viewer over there. And what is interesting is that it really gives this idea that this big slab is actually very, gets a lot of light. What could have been interesting actually is that I get like a little bit more from here, but I'll get back to that later. One thing also that I liked is that we get the secondary courtyard, we get like nice shadows and very sort of dynamic lines basically that sort of will play well with what's happening in the shot. And this is potentially, no, I think this is not the final one because it was like we were reading not properly the actual entrance, and we really wanted to see this door and understand the connection between the two. So this was like the proposal I did for this image. If we look at the entrance first, so this was the final, not the final image, but the final point of view. I think it didn't change. Yep, no. So here are like it took like 4 drafts to get to the final image. So this was the first one. You can see this is not a good, by any means. There were like many things to work with, but basically the good thing is that it sort of gives us first idea of like how we can populate the image and show like the different types of views and like parents waiting for their child, etc. And also have a nice discrepancy between the wooden part here and the concrete part here. And there's also the metal part that will come a little bit later. Also, we're using a sort of like a little bit of vegetation here and there in order to sort of cut the sides and have we also have quite a bit of greenery in the foreground, which does exist and which is a nice touch, because otherwise, one thing I've noticed and that really rarely works is when you're standing really on the side of the road and you have like the first thing you see is a huge line of asphalt, and this is usually quite hard to play with because you need to have like cast shadows or stuff happening in the foreground, but then it catches so much attention that it actually makes it a bit hard to focus on the project because you're already focusing on the people that are right in front of you. So what was interesting with this one is that we managed to reduce the presence of the asphalt quite a lot and have a nice sort of stripe with people and things like that. So that was pretty fun. The evolution is pretty straightforward, so I won't really go too much with it. Here, as I was saying, there was like this secondary plane or like backdrop, sorry, with the housing that we needed to integrate. That was like a little bit better, the vegetation management. This one was a little bit moved so that we get like a better sense of how the building stops, etc. This one is just a bit of detailing, but not crazy. And this one was the final one, which from this one, I think it was mainly remodeling. You can see the sort of texturing that is like a little bit better for the wooden part here, because otherwise we were really missing the sort of differentiation of the cladding, which was quite important. Also, one big thing that is happening between those two is the animation of the interior. You can see here how it completely changes, and here as well. One thing though, on retrospect, that I would kind of do differently is you can see that here you have very warm colors, here as well, whether it's supposed to be slightly colder because it's in the shadow. And the thing is that the contrast between this warm color and this warm color is actually not really efficient. So what we could have been interesting is to actually have our shadows much colder, like not necessarily darker, but just colder, so that we get like a more interesting cold-warm contrast. That would be quite interesting here, because then it would look even cozier inside. I also completely not forgot, but I guess I didn't do anything for this part, which was actually a gathering part for the children. So it would have been interesting to actually have a little bit of something happening here. The cold warm, we couldn't really do it here, but I think here it's fine because there's like contrast and saturation that makes it sort of okay. So this is fine. Here you can see the colors change as well. Everything is kind of okay-ish, I think. One thing that I'm always, unhappy with is my asphalt. And this, usually what I do is that I take like a couple of minutes to just add texture in post-production, because otherwise it looks always really too flat to me. Here you can see it's like almost non-recognizable, which is not very good. I mean, you recognize it's asphalt, but I don't like it when there's like no roughness visible. So this is something I would do differently. And one thing also that is definitely not really nice is the people integration. For some reason, I find it to be quite off. One thing though that is fun and that I kind of like when it comes to school is to get, when the project is very simple in terms of color palettes, is so that then all the color comes from the people. So here you can have like the children being a little bit more saturated and a little bit more like active. So this is something I find works quite well, and that's why I think it was kind of working for this image. So that's fine. If we look at the courtyard image, this is what we started with. Let's put a new one. Pretty simple, a little bit too cold, but you can see that we have pretty interesting stuff happening on the floor. As I was saying earlier, it could have been interesting even if it was just like a little bit of cheating, but to get, because there's a hole literally just here. So maybe I should have moved the camera a little bit in order to just get the starting of this one, in order to really show again how porous this slab is and how like not dark it actually is. But this is kind of how it looks. And here, even though it is a little bit harder to read than expected, but this is the first draft, we can start to sort of suggest this like stuff happening behind the fence here, which is quite nice. Here's the second image where actually we were changing, what's happening? Oh, here, sorry. We were changing the underside of the slab here with like wooden parts. So that was actually, well, It is not better or worse, it's just quite different in terms of feeling, because you can see here we're playing with a lot of really funky reflection that was quite fun. Here we don't have them anymore, but it's kind of okay. There was quite a bit of detailing to do and sort of like chamfers and stuff like that, and have like a little bit more of stuff happening in the concrete in order to make it a little bit more live. Here you can see that I'm still having issues with the sort of like contrast in between those two that makes it slightly hard to read, because we have a really harsh sun, which is fine because, as you can see, the angle is very like steep, so it's normal to have something very bright, but still you kind of want always to have at least a little bit of contrast in order to read properly the geometry of the building. Here it was a little bit lacking, I think. Here we have the new version with a little bit more work on the concrete texture, more people, and the light that is integrated here. That is quite fun. Here they're just like, they're not emitting lights, they're just like lights that you understand there's something going on, but nothing very special. I started adding like little details inside. Here it's still a little bit dead, but it's going to change by the end of the trip. And I'm still like fine-tuning a little the vegetation. I think it's moving. Yeah, you can see there's like a little bit better here, and get it like a little bit more transparency and like understand a little bit more how people work. Also, I think my, you know, it's in the last one. No, it was before. Whatever. Here, whoops, not you. You can see a little bit of evolution in the sky, because it's still very minimal, but it does add a little, because I think we were kind of lacking. Here was a little bit too, I don't know. I think I needed something in the sky, but it's very, I won't say subtle, but I mean, it's quite minimal. It's just something you read here and there. We still have mainly a blue sky because you have like an interesting contrast with the wood. So it's fine. I wouldn't, that's the thing, is like, sometimes what I would do is to like, the sky is actually going to be quite burnt and very bright. And the thing is, it's interesting when you have buildings that are quite dark, if I may say, because here, if this was desaturated and like brighter, you could almost have zero contrast with your concrete here. And this is very problematic, because then it means that the geometry of your building is almost illegible or non-legible or whatever. So this is something you want to avoid, because I know that people are always very afraid of like blue sky, etc. But this is what I would do generally, is keep a bright, not like bright, but medium bright and quite saturated sky, but I would desaturate and darken my vegetation, because bright blue or like saturated blue and saturated green are just disgusting generally. But here, once you start desaturating a little your vegetation, it starts to look okay. And you can keep this sort of like kind of enjoyable look of a blue, blue sky afternoon. So this is quite nice. Here is a little bit of details also that has been added. And again, it's still lacking details in the ground floor, sorry. But it's kind of okay, because we have so much stuff happening on the foreground here, or before it. So that's kind of okay. There's one issue that I always have with my, like here was really not treated properly, because I don't know why, but either way, this is something I would change right now. You can see two things. The first one is that the concrete is going everywhere. So I just put my forest back object on top of the concrete, instead of like stopping it and having like grass or like soil or whatever. And the other thing that is annoying is you can see this sort of annoying shape. And the thing is, it's a kind of technical issue I have sometimes, but when I put my forest back in edge mode, for some reason, sometimes it just simply crashes. So I end up like having this thing, and sometimes I just Photoshop the edge properly, but I didn't do it here. Again, people are kind of okay-ish, but not the best in terms of integration. Like this girl, for instance, doesn't look good at all. I don't know why. One thing also that I'm not really happy with is the floor. I think you can see the sort of texturing of like this brushed concrete. Could have been interesting to make it slightly more visible, so that you have a sort of like interesting play between the wooden part here and the concrete on the floor, and the more smooth concrete for the rest of the project. Because basically the whole idea in images, if you want to sort of emphasize one aspect, is to have like a contrasting one next to it. So if you want this one to look smoother, you just have to have like a rougher one next to it. And here everything looks a little bit too smooth to my taste. So that's the only thing. Beside that, nothing very much that I would change. One thing that's the thing I really wanted to mention basically is that as soon as you're happy with the composition, everything kind of falls into places quite quickly and you sort of know what to do. So the image kind of works. And I mean, like we did win the competition in the end. So, I mean, at least the images didn't prevent people from, like the jury, from understanding properly the idea of the architect, which is the whole point of making images. So that's it. I don't really think I have anything else to say. As I said, there's like some stuff regarding the shadows that should have been reworked, a little bit for the texturing, but overall the coloring I think is fine. It's very like a typical sunny day, but in terms of color palette, it still brings interesting ideas and very simple stuff that I think are working pretty well considering what we were trying to achieve in terms of effect for this image. This might be a little bit dark. Overall, that's the thing, is like you want to, since we're playing with the skull and trying this idea of like showing how everything is kind of active and related to all the spaces, etc. You kind of want things to have proper lighting everywhere, but you have to be careful that the lights are not too, that not everything becomes super flat because everything is lit the same way. So that's where you want to really play with like the fact that we have a big underside here that can be darker and a little bit colder, so that you can play around with like more warmer and a little bit brighter interiors here and there, and etc. And also, again, as I said, this idea of like, as a service provider, the one first thing you have to do is to make sure that the point of views you're going for fit the intent of your client. If you're doing just what the client asked without questioning it, this is generally a bad idea. But, and this is another, like the symmetrical idea, is that you shouldn't question your client's idea if it does make sense and if you agree with it, because the whole point is to make sure that you're conveying the right ideas. And you shouldn't, like, just for originality's sake or just for the sake of like being able to propose something, to propose stuff that actually work less than what you were supposed to work with at the beginning. So that'll be it for this short teardown. I hope it was interesting, and I'll see you in the next one in a couple of weeks or 3 weeks or whatever. Cheers guys, and see you later.